We've got Peter.
So, in the skies over Ukraine, a British Raytheon surface-to-air missile system is hunting Russian targets. Footage of its operation was released by the Air Force. Defenders note it's mobile and fast.
It is equipped with Osram 132 missiles, designed to destroy all types of UAVs, cruise missiles, and ideally, aerial targets like planes and helicopters.
To date, London has already delivered 8 of these systems to Kiev. Another 5 are being prepared for shipment. Meanwhile, on the front lines, Russian occupiers continue their assaults. According to the General Staff, the fiercest fighting is taking place in the Lyman sector. There, Ukrainian forces have successfully repelled Russian assaults near Rykudub, Torsky, and Hryhorivka in the Donetsk region. The invaders also tried to advance in the southern Slobozansky direction near the settlements of Novy Mir, Hlybok, Milov, and Barn, and Vovchansk in the Kharkiv region.
In the southern Slobozansky direction, the enemy attempted to improve their tactical position near Vovchansk and Zelenyai, but was unsuccessful. The invaders also intensified offensive actions toward Milov. Operations to locate and destroy Russian assault groups are ongoing.
Russian assaults in the Pokrovsk direction have not ceased. The invaders are throwing a large number of reserves into this area. At the same time, military experts emphasized the Russians will not succeed in a blitzkrieg.
Today, the Russians, specifically in the Pokrovsk direction, are acting most actively, in the harshest and most brutal way, trying to and already bringing their reserves into play, in particular, 2 motorized rifle brigades. And these are precisely the motorized rifle brigades, including units from certain divisions of the now very well-known 8th Combined Arms Army, whose commander, literally just a day ago, was eliminated by Ukrainian defense forces.
Moscow is also betting on so-called bonsai attacks. According to the American Institute for the Study of War, the Russian command is training its soldiers to carry out assaults using motorcycles, all-terrain vehicles, and quad bikes. However, the Russians themselves do not believe in the effectiveness of this tactic and are saying on social media that motorcycle assaults result in high casualty rates. Analysts at the Institute also do not support the effectiveness of these tactics.
The pace of advancement remains slow, and even the introduction of high-speed vehicles has not allowed Russian forces to launch a more dynamic offensive. From the report of the Institute for the Study of War.
And when Russia has no military victories, propagandists are sent into battle. The General Staff has denied the Russians' claim that they allegedly entered the village of Dakhny in the Dnipropetrovsk region.
The invaders managed to take a photo with the Russian tricolor, but that was the last thing they did. Ukrainian soldiers eliminated the occupiers. In one of the following assaults, 2 Russian servicemen were luckier. They survived and were captured by the Marine Brigade of the Ukrainian Navy, thus joining the exchange pool. Therefore, the reports by Russian propaganda about capturing a bridgehead in the Dnipropetrovsk region do not correspond to reality. Dakhny remains under the control of the Ukrainian Defense Forces. From a statement by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Facebook.
Meanwhile, in the south of the country, Ukrainian border guards destroyed a Grad multiple rocket launcher system, which the occupiers had used the day before to attack both military personnel and civilians. The enemy tried to hide the equipment, but it was spotted by aerial reconnaissance, and FPV drone pilots turned it into scrap metal. In addition, fighters from the Forpost Brigade destroyed a Russian artillery installation with a precise drone strike, taking out both the crew and the supply group. The total losses of the aggressor country's army since the start of the full-scale invasion have already exceeded 1,020,000 people. In the past 24 hours, more than 1,000 Russian soldiers were eliminated, along with 3 armored vehicles, 40 artillery systems, and dozens of other pieces of Russian equipment.
We have Alexei Hetman, military analyst. Alexei, hello?
Good afternoon.
Let me start with this. Yes, the losses of the Russian army are very large. As many analysts have already said on our program, Putin generally doesn't care about the losses among his personnel. No matter how you look at it, no matter how huge the mobilization resource, the army still needs replenishment if Putin wants to play the long game. That's exactly what the Central Bureau of Intelligence is saying, and Mr. Kovalenko has confirmed it. Do you think Putin will go for a general mobilization?
But it's already been announced. From the very start of the special military operation, a decision was made about mobilization. Legally, it exists, but in practice, it hasn't been carried out. The ranks of the Russian armed forces were replenished at the expense of, well, criminals, and, well, at the expense of contract soldiers, to put it simply. They named a figure of about 150,000 mobilized this year. Well, that's an impressive number. So, what are the losses? Let's do the math from the beginning of this year, and that's about 25,000 a month that the Russians can mobilize. Meanwhile, last fall, especially at the end of the year, it was 35 to 40,000. Well, everyone apparently expected the war to end soon. And Russians get their financial reward right away when they sign the contract, not after some period of service. That's why many signed up. They wanted easy money, and then it turned out the war would go on. About 20,000 have deserted from their military units in Russia as of today. And the figure of 25,000 is less than it was at the end of last year, and less than what Putin wanted. He said that we are ready and can very easily raise our mobilization capacity to 50 or 60,000 per month. So far, it's only 25. Well, that's the situation.
In turn, how would you assess the current military potential of the Russian Federation? Can we say that it is faltering, or not, given the catastrophic losses? After all, replenishing personnel isn't just about driving in new recruits. You have to train them, equip them, arm them, and so on. Now, in turn, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine has said that on the Pokrovsk direction, they managed to stop such a massive Russian onslaught because the Russians abandoned assaults using heavy equipment. They're advancing only with infantry there, on motorcycles or other vehicles, electric bicycles, and so on.
Well, they're not using heavy equipment because, as was just mentioned, the numbers show what kind of tank losses they've suffered. The Russians' losses, well, this year they've been losing about 220 tanks per month. Their production capacity is 20 tanks per month, and in addition, they can pull another 50, 60, up to 70 from storage. Of those that are still left, there were 15,000, and from those 15,000, they could put together about 3,000 or 4,000, 5 at most. The equipment is old, everything there was looted. And so, that stockpile that was in strategic storage, which was talked up so grandly, with literally tens of thousands of vehicles, has pretty much run out. That's why they can return about 100 to the front line each month. And that's not counting the tanks they can repair. But those don't really count, because they were already there, and still are. So, the irrecoverable losses are about 200 tanks, while their ability to replenish is around 100. That means there's a negative balance of about 100 tanks per month. But it's no coincidence that the American Institute for the Study of War said it's possible they'll lose all their tanks by the end of the year. Well, we've heard something like that before. They only have enough left for 3 or 4 more shellings. No, of course that's not actually going to happen. They'll just start using them less, because right now they have fewer than 3,000 tanks along the entire front line. Well, with losses like that, they definitely won't last long. So yes, it's going to be like vehicles from now on, in the Pokrovsk direction. As Commander Sursti said, it's more than 100,000. I think he mentioned 111,000 were pulled in there. But that's due to shifting forces along the front line, not because of some hidden reserve. And that gives them the ability to carry out operations. Well, yes, the pressure is increasing, but at what cost? It's not like they're charging forward shoulder to shoulder over there. So, they're launching assault operations with a large number of people all at once. But if they move in tightly packed formations, well, that's Napoleonic-era fire tactics, and those are pretty outdated. Although, the North Koreans did use that, advancing in lines, shoulder to shoulder. So how do they achieve an advantage? Through frequent tactical rotations. Roughly every 10 days, well, about a week to a week and a half, the people who took part in the fighting are pulled back, not far behind the front lines, where they get themselves back in order, regroup, reorganize the units they fought with, and get their weapons back in shape. And then after a week and a half or two, it's a new round. They go back into battle again. And so, in this kind of carousel, The people carrying out the assaults are constantly rotating, always being replaced. These are fresh forces. We don't have the numbers to rotate people that often. We also try to rotate our people because it's just impossible for someone to hold out physically and mentally otherwise. An American, well, not the American Institute for the Study of War. I don't remember exactly who, but somewhere in the Pentagon. They calculated that a person can stay in an active combat zone for about 72 hours. After that, they practically lose their ability to fight as effectively as they did 72 hours earlier. So that's how they calculated it. Well, maybe that's just for Americans. For us, maybe it's not 72 hours, but 720 hours. That's a rather grim joke. But still, people get worn out, and they need, we say rest. But it's not rest. It's about getting yourself back in order. Getting your weapon and uniform in order. Well, although sometimes it's just about getting some sleep and having a proper meal. Because under shilling, as we all know, you can't sleep, you can't eat, and, pardon the intimate detail, you can't even go to the bathroom properly.
Another important point. The American Institute for the Study of War analyzed how Russia uses motorcycles in assaults, and how they are adapting to this. In turn, the analytical article by the American Institute for the Study of War states that the Russian Federation plans to purchase 200,000 Chinese-made motorcycles for the Russian military. Analysts also note that at the end of June, the Russian Ministry of Defense published videos showing Russian officials arriving at the Novosibirsk, in Novosibirsk and so on, at various academies. And at some training grounds, they are already building separate tracks for off-road motorcycle and buggy driving practice. Does this mean that the Russian occupiers are now completely changing their tactics, moving directly to assaults using light vehicles of this kind, like motorcycles, which you've already mentioned in part? But on the other hand, as practice shows and as reported by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, for most Russian occupiers, an assault on a motorcycle or similar vehicle is a one-way mission.
By and large, yes. They're not very good at using them, but as you can see, they're starting to prepare in Novosibirsk. We use motorcycles too. Basically, it's not exactly new. This kind of equipment was used even back in World War II. Well, that's technology for you. Let's remember what the English, the British tanks were like in World War I. When they first appeared, those things were the size of a house. And then they became lighter. And now, basically, when it comes to using tanks, statistics show that 4 out of 5 tanks are destroyed as soon as they enter the battlefield, Russian tanks, that is. So, that's 80%. If they keep using them and the balance is negative, losses are higher than what they can supply. Naturally, they'll try to use lighter vehicles. Well, motorcycles and buggies are basically also, you could call them lightly armored vehicles, because if you hang a couple of bulletproof vests on them, then a buggy becomes lightly armored. This is quite a dangerous trend. If they learn to handle motorcycles and buggies well and work out their tactics, it's not just about riding around and heading out. You need a certain tactic. There was a video showing how our special units train, and they practice how, I won't go into details, maybe I shouldn't, but how to move, how to retreat, how to take up positions. If the Russians can learn this quickly enough, then it's not an unsolvable problem, but it will be more difficult. Because those assault groups that are now crawling and running, although they also try to advance at dusk, when daytime drones have already stopped working and nighttime drones haven't started yet. So they use this tactic, making hideouts, then sort of popping up from the ground like lenses and starting to attack in small groups from different directions. If they also start using some light vehicles for this, that will make things more complicated. But we understand this. Understanding what the enemy is preparing is already half the battle. It helps prevent it. We're also preparing certain countermeasures, and I think there are ways to deal with motorcycles too. There are plenty of methods. We're going to start using anti-personnel mines soon. I think a motorcycle will get blown up by those as well. And, there's also something that was used back in World War II. It's called putanka, basically just a lot of light wire. That's what's called putanka. You just throw these things in rolls, so to speak, and after that, you can't walk or drive through them.
It's inexpensive. It's a cheap system. It's not like Dragon's Teeth. Against tanks, it's just regular, thin wires, but tangled up and laid out in a seam like that, even barbed wire can get caught in it. Or it can stop motorcycles. So it's cheaper than mines.
Next, there's another topic I wanted to discuss with you: long-range strikes. In turn, the question of supplying Taurus cruise missiles to Ukraine remains open. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz stated this in an interview. He emphasized that the Taurus system is extremely complex, and its maintenance requires extensive training for Ukrainian soldiers. Let's listen to his direct statement and discuss it in more detail.
It has always been clear that if we supply Taurus missiles, this weapon will be used not by German soldiers, but by Ukrainians. By the way, the same goes for other cruise missiles supplied by the UK or France. The problem for us is that this system is extremely complex, and it takes at least 6 months to train soldiers to use it. We will no longer publicly discuss which weapons we are supplying and what we are doing to support Ukraine militarily, because I want Putin to have some uncertainty about what we are doing militarily. Only one thing is certain: Germany will not become a party to the war.
And here's an interesting point. I recall the recent words of Mr. Umerov, Ukraine's Minister of Defense, regarding plans to increase long-range strikes on Russian territory. By the way, just before our interview, the Security Service of Ukraine and the main intelligence directorate of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense reported that long-range drones had struck several Russian military targets, both on Russian territory and in temporarily occupied Crimea. Taurus missiles and similar long-range missiles, how much will they improve Ukraine's ability to eliminate or destroy military targets and military logistics deep behind enemy lines?
Well, they're not exactly short range. They can fly up to 500 kilometers. According to international classification, that's considered medium-range weaponry, although we keep calling them long-range. No, they're not long-range. They're not even medium-range. They're actually short-range. So, well, again, we immediately remember Scholz, who said that everything on those missiles is written in German, so you have to learn German. Well, apparently the situation is that, unfortunately, a minority of the population, German citizens, are being influenced by the Russian fifth column, which is very actively supporting the transfer of weapons to our country. So that's how it is. That's what the mayor says, that it'll take 6 months. There's no need for any 6 months. Storm Shadow and Scalp cruise missiles aren't any more complicated. How could they be? Well, let's look at it this way. We are actively using British and French cruise missiles, which are, in principle, quite similar to the missiles that Germany could provide us. We've gotten used to them. We know and understand these missiles, and we use them actively. What's so super complicated about it? Really, what is it? This missile can also be launched from an F-16 or from our adapted Su or MiG aircraft modified for such a missile. The control system, the navigation system of this missile, it can be inertial. That is, you program it and the missile flies. What else is needed? What do you need to learn? You know, it's easy to hide behind words like that. But unfortunately for our partners and fortunately for us, we can't be fooled that easily anymore. We've heard all these conversations before. We understand everything perfectly well. And when a particular phrase or an abstract idea isn't adequately backed up with compelling arguments, most of us will simply stop believing in it completely. You have to learn. What exactly? Well, I get it. If, say, some missile specialist came out and said, you know, here's the difference. Just without going into any secret details. The difference between those missiles, between the Neptune, Storm Shadow, and Scalp, Taurus, is that this, and this, like this, like this, like this. And for that, you need this and that kind of knowledge. Well, then it would be clear. But when you just say it's complicated and you need to study for 6 months, what exactly do you need to study for 6 months? Listen, as soon as we got the Mirages, we immediately started flying them. And remember how they told us about the F-16, that you supposedly have to train on it for 100 years. You know, all this talk, It's just excuses. Excuses more for, I think, not for us, but for internal consumption within Germany itself. We are very grateful to Germany. After the United States and all the European countries, Germany provides the greatest amount of aid. So, on the one hand, we're not going to take offense at them or rub it in their faces. On the other hand, to believe that if we get Taurus missiles, 300, 20 or 30, or however many they can spare, 50 units, that this will fundamentally change something on the front line. You know, it won't change anything. It will help, but in essence, it won't fundamentally change anything. So, if they don't want to provide them, well, let's.
It wouldn't hurt to have them.
Let's thank Germany. Let's say, yes, we understand that training is necessary. We understand that you don't want to become a party to the conflict. Although, well, Russia could. How can you? To become a party to the conflict, you have to commit military aggression. That is, as stated in the United Nations General Assembly Resolution number 3314 of 1974, which defines what aggression is and what constitutes a party to a conflict. The transfer of weapons does not mean, yes, that this makes you a party to the conflict. Yes. If Russia wants to recognize you as a party to the conflict, then whether you supply Taurus missiles or not, it will recognize you anyway. So what does that do for you? Make you feel warm or cold? Well, let them recognize it then.
Alexei. Yes, Alexei, we heard you. We heard your position. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us live. Alexei Hetman, military analyst, was with us live.